So, okay, as usual, before we start this module, module 10. So this is the third last module in this unit. We are going to look at the transport and logistics. Just to quickly recap what we had last week. Anything in your mind? Yeah, intermodal transport. Transport of global trade. Overhead.
Containerization.
Yes.
Containerization.
What's the other one? We're talking about two key elements of intermodal. Multiple modal. Intermodal, multimodal. What are the two key elements of intermodal transport? Containerization and door-to-door service. Is that correct?
Transferability and
Yeah, transferability and door-to-door services. Yeah. Well, transferability is overcome pretty much by containerization. That's the wording in the slide. And that module, module 9, obviously provides you the overall idea for your assignment. Of course, lots of details actually already addressed in different modules, in previous modules, but that module, module 9, provides you the overall idea, the difference between the two processes, and some key points you need to focus on. So just remember, the assignment for this module due on Sunday, right? Is that correct? Yeah, on Sunday. So don't submit later, but if you have any reasons will stop you to submit on time, you need to request extension formally well before. What we do assess request very carefully. We don't just approve extension whenever you request. So, but if you do have a problem, we just need to provide assistance to you. So just also the formal process. You can download the extension request form from the Marlow site, but certainly I would encourage you to actually to stick with the schedule because the more you actually live to the end, the more stress you possibly have just before the examination period. But if you have any problems, not just from this unit to other units, if you have any problems either directly related to your studies or probably something else, talk to your lecturers. Okay? Always talk to your lecturers. If the lecturers can't help you directly, they will direct you to the right person to offer you that assistance you need. Okay? Right. So, as I said, this is going to be the third last module of this unit. We'll look at the transport and the logistics. Now, your course is about logistics, maritime and logistics management, and you are going to have more units related to supply chain logistics management. And also warehousing distribution. So we're not going to provide detailed information. It's more providing you how actually transport fits into, or the role of transport in the logistics process. So that's what we are going to do in this module. We have two focus questions, and the topic's going to have, we have the logistics, or what mean by logistics, because we can find lots of, probably hundreds of different definitions of logistics, and we look at the relationship between transport and logistics, and also transport and supply chain. And we also look at the integrated logistics. There are many different definitions. I'm not going to read those, but as you find, I'll provide the three different definitions here, definitions of logistics. The first one is the entire process of materials and the products moving into, through, and out of firm. So from that definition, you see the focal point is the firm or the business, and the upstream and downstream, and that's the process. So if you compare the three definitions, you find this one is the simplest one, and probably in terms of activities, probably with least number of activities included in this process. When you move further into the third one, you find it's basically it's talking about supply chain. No, it's completely differently. So we do need to understand there are differences between logistics and supply chains. So that's why you have logistics management as a unit, and also supply chain management as a standalone unit. They are different. They are very different. So we probably will not necessarily will have to adopt one of those definitions just to give you the idea that there are many definitions, and we just need to understand how transport actually fits into logistics or supply chain. Now this is very much simplified diagram of logistics and the possible activities involved, and you can find where transport is in this whole process. So we start from the upstream. Well, when we say upstream, that's the supply chain, when we look at how the actual material and eventually processed products and final products actually flow. So we start from the procurement. Well, procurement, so it could be procurement of raw material. So you also have a unit called procurement, right? Global procurement. So that's a procurement, that's upstream. And that's external flow of goods that must be organized or monitored. So, well, years ago, this is absolutely an external activity and not necessarily actually had very good level of monitoring. And then once you have the procurement, you have the inventory of raw materials. So this is the internal side, the storage. If you see, well, in some diagram, you see, well, this is storage. Now the inventory needed to be managed because it's a cost factor. Right? It's a cost factor. And then within inventory, that process from the inventory of raw material to inventory of finished products, of course, this can be semi-finished or semi-processed products, this part. Okay, from raw material to that one, you have lots of internal movement. Now, when you think about the internal movement, well, because we're talking about the transport, right? This unit is about transport. So the internal movement, it could be with on-site, a bigger factory. Think about a bigger factory, you have movement, physical movement of raw materials, semi-finished products, etc. But you can also think widely when we have specialization of production, and that so-called internal movement, or internal movement means within intra-organizational products movement. So it could be long distance, but still within that organization. So it could be long distance as well. And then you have obviously, this involves internal transport. And then we have the distribution. So once you have the finished products, we have distribution. So you have the unit called warehousing and distribution, right? So that's your third unit. So you see the whole process. This is the whole process. Now, we're talking about the logistics process here. But if we talk about supply chain, then you got lots of other elements, right? The finance side of it, the marketing side of it. So you got the whole thing together, and that's why you have so many units. They make sense because they work together. So give you example. This is just a diagram, and this is an example. Well, muffin. There are lots of people love muffin for morning tea or for breakfast. Now, how the whole process actually looks like? Well, we start from the raw material. So that's the farm. Those raw agricultural products. So it could be milk, and then we have those wheat, right? So between wheat and the milk and the final product here, well, they're fairly far, right? Wheat, how can you see muffin from wheat, right? There must be a process. So we have the movement of those raw materials, milk and wheat, to the food, to a food processing factory. So, and it's likely probably it's a wholesale process. So wheat needed to be processed into flour before they can be used for the next product. And the milk, once again, they need to be processed. We don't drink milk right from when we get those from the cows, right? Still need a process there. And then from the processing factory, we have the product, semi-processed product, as we're called, because it can be a final product, because you can go to the supermarket and buy flour, right? So you can, but in terms of muffin, the final products we're talking about, this is only a semi-processed product. So between this factory to this one, it could be wholesaler and therefore the transport as a final product, but also can be a semi-finished product from flour to muffin. And then you say, well, this is a movement. Once again, semi-finished products to the final products. You have the transport process. And then to the retailer, So retailer, once we have the products in retailers, most of the time customers go there and buy their products. But on the e-commerce, well, what we have now, we found actually online shopping is a common thing. So it can be from retailers delivered to consumers, and it's very common. If you walk into the supermarkets, you always see people picking up those products, right? They pack those products, pick up those things. What are they doing? They're actually picking orders for online shoppers. That's what they do. So that's why you see those people have a trolley and picking different products. That's for online shopping. If we wanted to look at the transactions between those parties in that process, we'll just take this for example here, from the factory to flour. And what we can see is we have the physical movement of goods. Well, from the factory, we have the flour, bags of flours, probably tons of flour, from the processing factory to a wholesaler, and that's the transaction. And then we have the other side, obviously the monetary transaction, and that's the reverse direction. So paid by the purchaser to the processing factory, and then the information link. That's the two directions. So two-way. While we have the information, two arrows, it's two direction. While we have this two direction, others only one direction. So well, money only one direction. What does this mean here? We have two directional line here.
Confirmation of purchase.
Yeah, confirmation of purchase. So that's from the buyer, right? They provided the order, and then the processing factory also provided the information. Say, well, it's ready. We're sending. So it's a communication basically. So must be two-way information exchange. Okay. But the physical movement of the actual products is one way, from the processing factory, from the supplier to the purchaser. And if we go further, well, because we want to find out how actual transport fits into it. And then if you look at this one, Well, basically what says here, well, the ownership change in the middle, which means, well, the ownership originated from the processing factory in terms of the semi-processed products, that's the forward. So from here, ownership changed to that one once the money being paid. And also the responsibility of delivery. Now, what we want to look at is transport. Now, look at the transport component here. It can be very complicated. It can be easier, fairly straightforward. Just involve one operator, transport operator, and between the processing factory and the buyer. It can be very easy. It can be many layers of operators. Because if this is long distance, interstate, or sometimes even international, and think about how many layers of those operators. This is to do with the transport side. And of course, in between, you have the warehousing, the storage as well. So what you can see here is, you remember when we look at the different parties involved in that transport process, and we also ask the questions, well, who actually is responsible for the process or coordinating the process, right? Did we look at this? When we look at how many parties or who actually involved that process from point A to B, we look at the pros, the terminal side. We look at those trucking company or transport companies, freight forwarders, etc. Right? Now, freight forwarder here plays an important role, because a freight forwarder doesn't necessarily mean ownership of physical assets for the physical movement of goods. But certainly one important role is for them to coordinate the whole process. So you see, it can be very complicated. And with this process, if we have many layers of operators involved in this process, you can think about the time required for this process and also the cost of it. Right? And also the cost of it. Now this is probably a little bit more abstract, but I'll provide you more detail. Now this actually, we have logistics in the middle, and obviously you want to think about the transport, because we're talking about transport. But before we look at this, we look at, well, just the logistics. Well, what logistics means? Well, logistics in the middle, and the logistics actually bring all those four key components together. So that's value-added function of logistics. What do we mean by that? What do we mean by that? So, well, value-added of the logistic function. Now we have the production, location, time, and control. Now, production we mentioned a few times already in this unit. Well, production, if in a very high level, larger scale, we're talking about production, concentration of production, specialization of production, etc. But here, if you look at it more locally, well, production, it means shipment size and even order size, the packaging side, and the inventory. Now, what this is to do with logistics? Now, because these are, we consider these as variables, because production, in terms of shipment size, we can go larger shipment size and smaller shipment size, right? Is that correct? Packaging, when we talk about containerization, what in your mind?
Well, it's the way you package it should be optimized so that you can fit most number of units in, for example, a container. Yeah, absolutely. And the way you are going to move it, whether you use containers or other means, you have the specification or dimension of your packaging and also the extent of your packaging. Because any packaging you put into your products is a cost, and you want to reduce that cost, right? So you don't need to overpack it, or you don't want to underpack it, because underpacking will damage the product, but overpacking, additional cost. And what about inventory? How inventory to do with logistics? Because we're talking about value added. you have to plan for how much inventory you're going to have to store.
Yeah. What's our objective? Normally, what are objective of managing the inventory?
Well, usually it's to have as little inventory as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So logistical function here will provide us the assurance we can have minimum inventory. Because the high level inventory you have, or the stock, sometimes we call just simply call stock. The higher the stock you have, the higher the cost. Because your capital tied with your inventory. And also, yes?
But in some cases, the higher your inventory, the higher your service level.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Well, in terms of you don't actually
So you
disappoint.
have to plan for the optimal inventory to provide the service level that you want.
Yeah, absolutely. So we need to balance out what's the cost of additional inventory to ensure that you have 100% of customer satisfaction, which means you don't have any incidents of stock out, which means customers come to you and then you say, well, sorry, I don't have this one in the stock. So you lose your sale. But then if you say, well, I need to meet 100% of satisfaction, then you need to have very high level of inventory. So it's a balance. But what we want to do here is, understand here is logistics actually plays a very important role in this production with different variables. Now the location, we have expanded the market and the low distribution cost. What does that mean? Now this is pretty much sort of a summary where we try to bring everything together because we already discussed those in previous modules. What does this mean? Location, we'll expand it, we'll still remember we have logistics in the middle, production, and this is location. Expand the markets and low distribution costs. What that mean? Yes, Maria?
Like a distribution center wants to reach out to as many customers as possible.
Yes, this is on the one hand, towards the consumers. What about the other side? Yes, sir?
It's like a hub and spoke system.
Yeah, you have hub and spoke system. So let's go a little bit further. Maria, one thing is the service area. So you have the service area, distribution centers, cover as many as possible you can. And also, we needed to consider between the distribution centers or before they reach to the distribution center, you want to have the long distance movement to be very cost effective, right? So that's why we have distribution centers and we have probably less number of distribution centers because the more number, the higher the number of distributions we have, the higher the cost, the operation cost. So we try to reduce it. But once again, we need to strike a balance because if you have very small number of distribution centers, which means you need to travel very long between your distribution center and your service area. Now think about the pedal in your quiz when you do the PUD, your pickup and delivery time, the pedal time, right? So think about those. We bring these together. What about expanded market? What about expanded market? Now, expand the market in relation to the products we have.
Well, today you can purchase almost anything from anywhere in the world.
Yeah, absolutely, spot on. So that's the thing. And the reason behind it is because we can actually control the cost of doing this very low. Now, if it's very expensive, well, it doesn't work because the product itself probably costs you, say, $20. And the shipment cost, the postage cost, probably be also $20. And then eventually, you ended up with $40. It doesn't make sense. But if we reduce the postage to $5, we'll say we're fine. $20 plus $5 of postage, it does make sense. Time, making goods available when required. So that's the reliability side. Now, we just talk about the inventory, right? We want to try to minimize the inventory we have, but at the same time, we need to ensure that we don't have any incidents of stock out, which means we lose our sales. How do we do it? Well, we reduce it when we have the confidence to say, if I want it, I know exactly it takes 5 days for me to get that product delivered, my order delivered from the time where actually I placed the order. So you are sure how much time will be taken for delivery, from order to the delivery. So this is reliability, and you don't expect any problems in between. How can we do it? Well, that's logistics. That's logistics. Okay? Logistics here means not just to say, well, the actual transport side, but also in the warehousing. So when you actually do the units in your third year, warehousing and distribution, you'll find actually it's very complicated. It's an extremely complicated operation within the warehouses or distribution centers. And also time here means, well, the speed of this process. Well, the faster we go, the lower the cost. And control. Well, control means, well, the whole process, the production, distribution, the whole process, we need to have high level of control, which means, well, we're always certain, say, well, what's next? And how we organize, how we plan our production. Because production planning is a different, obviously it's a different subject here, but planning of production is one thing is a cost factor, and the other thing is customer service. And how do we do this? Well, this is communication from the purchaser, but from the production to the distribution. Once again, we need to have logistics in the middle to ensure we have the smooth transaction from the production to distribution and to the end consumers. So the question here is, what's the key to fulfill these functions? Obviously, we go back to that one, logistics in the middle, right? And if we want to ask further, well, what about the key thing in logistics? Well, that's transport. You agree? Does that make sense? The next few slides further explain the role of transport in logistics. Now the point here is that, well, we always have a mismatch, all the time. Modern days, we have mismatch between the place of production and the demand. Well, due to many reasons, labor specialization is just one of those. A natural resource endowment is another. Well, for example, we are in Tasmania. We have less than 500,000 people here. We have very fertile land. We can produce lots of fruits, vegetables, all sorts of things. But we can't use them. We can't consume them all. We only can consume small part of it. Well, this is to do with natural resource endowment. So which means we have surplus and we don't want to waste. So we trade. We need to move those out of Tasmania to either mainland Australia or to export those. And then labor specialization I mentioned before. Mass production and scale economies create the need for transport, because if we have surplus, if we have demand, then we need to actually move those between the market and the production. So this is what we have, the reality. Transport here is affected to actually compress the time, which means we actually can speed up the process and make the whole process more efficient and cost effective. So faster transit time minimize pipeline inventory. Now we talk about the inventory, right? Inventory normally most of the time you would think, oh, okay, well, inventory, that's the stocks, the products inside your warehouse, back in your store, right? That's the inventory. The stuff you put it there, not on your shelf. Of course, those stuff on your shelf also part of your inventory. But also inventories could be in the pipeline. So that's between the production, after the products actually go out of the production site, before they reach to a distribution center or retail stores. So in between, we call pipeline. Now, the longer the pipeline, possibly the long time and therefore higher cost. But we can actually reduce the cost of inventory in the pipeline by speeding it up, right? Reduce the time in that pipeline. And also, time saved in delivery frees up time in other areas of logistics chain. Now, can you give me a good example of this to make a point? Say, well, time saved in delivery frees up time in other areas of the logistics chain. Can you give me an example of a product? Say, well, it's so important that we actually free up, will save time in the delivery and free up the time in other
Perishable products.
Yes?
I'm not sitting on the shelf for too long and going off, so causing the company to lose money.
Yeah. So what we want here is we want as long as possible the shelf life, right? Which means the perishable product or vegetables on the shelf stay fresh as long as possibly we can. So you have longer time frame for this product to be sold in good quality. Now, how do we do this? Well, if it takes too long in the pipeline, well, from the farm to the processing site and to the store, and the less shelf life left. Is that correct? Because the shelf life of those vegetables or fruits are certain. Right? Of course, we have science to extend shelf life, but only to some extent and with cost. But if we can reduce the time in the transit, well, we save time and pretty much we actually extend the shelf life of those products on the shelf. Maximizing inventory velocity. Well, we say we reduce the inventory level, but another term here we say we're maximizing inventory velocity. What does that mean? Now this is a term you certainly will come across in later module, but we just quickly say, well, this is basically how many times you can turn around, right? The more times you turn around your inventory, the better. You don't want to have large inventory. Well, you only order twice in a year, which means, well, each cycle takes six months. What does that mean? You need to have very high level of inventory, which is not good. Okay? But you'll come across this term in other later modules, so we just touch on that one. Reliability. Now, we talked about minimizing inventory. Well, the confidence we have is we have reliable process, transport process or logistics process to allow us to actually maintain very low level of inventory because we have the confidence in the reliability of the whole process, right? So if this is 5 days, it's always 5 days, and you can calculate, and that's what you do. And also reliability means, well, the absence of loss and damage in the process. And then we have the standardization of processes, practices, and policies to reduce risk, time, and labor costs. Now, these are the things that most of the time we probably don't notice. But they are very important. They are very important. Standardization means, well, even though we are not operating in the same area, so you can be in the retailing area or can be just in the transport. Now, we are in complete different business sectors, but if we have standardized the process, then we can reasonably expect, well, what's going to happen, right? What's going to happen? Of course, we still need a communication, regular communication to make sure we actually coordinate the process. But once we standardize, well, that's the expectation. So it's just like when you walk into a KFC or McDonald's. Well, you order something, you expect this gonna be the product because they standardize. But if you walk into a restaurant, well, it could be very different because the point is not standardization. Right? So, and also don't forget, well, the practices, and we talk about those comparability as well. So when you look at this, think about all different things we covered before, and this should be actually included in your assignment as well. Just in time delivery and information support. Now, once again, we're back to the point of inventory, right? And when we have zero inventory, well, that's the best we can achieve because we have no cost associated with the inventory. So when you don't have any inventory, well, you go for just in time, which means you only order when you want it. So you have zero stock. Now, theoretically, well, you can have zero stock, but probably practically, you still have very low level of stock. But just in time, which means, well, you almost remove the storage, the inventory, and the order when you need it. So if you expect this product's going to be sold out in the next 5 days, well, you order it because it takes 5 days. So you reprice it when you sell it. And in the production, now this is pretty much in the production. Well, originally from the production, that's from the Japanese production lines, and a very important concept to use because significantly reduce the production cost. Okay. And once again, how do we do it? Well, because anything you use need to be moved. So we need to have the confidence in our transport and logistical process in order for us to use this. If you just say, well, I just want to use just-in-time concept and in my production because it has the lowest cost. But before you do that, make that decision, you need to make sure you do have the support, logistical support, to allow you to use this practice. Any questions? And the next thing is flexibility. Flexibility. Now, sometimes the flexibility is, well, sometimes it probably contradicts standardization, because standardization means, well, you expect this is always the case. Flexibility means, well, you need to actually customize. Now, how do we achieve both? Well, we try to achieve both, right? Because this is important characteristics required by customers. And there will be non-standard occasions or emergent situations where you needed to provide the products or the services. And you needed to have that flexibility to meet your client's need. Once again, transport is very important component to provide that flexibility. Now, if we look at the air transport, airline industry, for example, this is something we're probably very familiar with for passenger travel. And then we have, sometimes we have those incidents, we have weather conditions or whatever, we need to reschedule those flights, or sometimes we have peak because of a certain event. Now, this is the time when we look at whether those airlines have the capacity to actually to provide the capacity for additional demand. Now, when we talk about transport, we talk about airlines, talk about travel. There's something happening from UK.
Thomas Cook.
Yes. So that's a long-standing company. Well, went to a liquidation and causing huge problem around the world. Travelers, right? Now this is to do with transport. Okay. So the flexibility here is, well, we need to actually, we have standard practices, but yet we still have the capacity to actually to meet non-standard demand or those non-recurring events. And with this flexibility, we have the customization. So provision of customized services, carrier managed inventory, reordering, labeling, etc. Which, well, this means, well, for some businesses, they want the full package of the service. Well, they only focus on their core business, so they probably source out the whole thing. They say, well, we just produce, design and produce those products, and we don't do anything else. They don't do the planning side even, because they rely on a third party to collect the information from the market, from the ordering, and they do the modeling to provide a schedule for production. And once they finish the products, they don't even look at, well, how we do the labeling, exact packaging. Well, everything will be sourced out. So they only focus on probably one or two key activities, and that's it. So we needed to have that capacity to provide that service we needed. Now, because we are in the maritime, and you can look at those very large container shipping companies, and you can see actually the range of service actually they provide. They almost provided a full service around the full supply chain. So this is one-stop shopping. But this doesn't mean that those companies have the capacity to provide that services required in that process right from the beginning by themselves. No, that's not true. They have lots of contractors, other parties actually providing that service for them. But they offer you one-stop shopping. And the performance of transport is a major determinant of efficiency of the whole logistical supply chain, and eventually determine the competitiveness of the organization within the chain. Very important part, important role of transport in the logistics process. I think I'll stop here. So I'll stop here, and then you come back probably at 11 and start the tutorial session.